Hi, welcome to the Sacred You podcast. I'm Rachel Goodwin, and I'm a channel and healer who loves to teach and empower others. I offer a look at spirituality in fresh and new ways, and you can see more of my work at my website at rachelgoodwin.dk and the classes and sessions that I do. So I had the incredible honour to interview Maria Kvilhaug. And Maria is the author of The Seed of Yggdrasill, The Maiden with the Mead, and the Blade Honer series, as well as other books, articles, and lecture videos on Lady of the Labyrinth YouTube channel and her Facebook page. Most of Maria's work stem from her academic background in the historical, cultural, linguistic, and religious aspects of pre-Christian Scandinavia. Norwegian born and bred, she writes most of her stuff in English in order to best reach an international audience. And in order to earn more from her work so that she can finish her book projects and make more videos and audio recordings of her books, she opened a Patreon account on the winter solstice 2020. And I love Maria's work. I've been a big fan since 2015, and she's really unique, I think, in the work that she produces. She has a fresh eye and a deep understanding due to her academic background and her spiritual insight into things. And I enjoyed this interview so much. I hope you do as well. Lots of blessings, everybody. Au heia valeana oe e kahaliko puhaku kui kuhia o kaunaia a kahapu kumamoni nei Pikoi kahimana I kahapili koholuaia Ea ke kaula lopiana e kohopu kapaliliai Haina mai kapuana e kahaliko puokukui. Hello everyone, we've got another episode of Sacred You for you, and today I'm interviewing Maria Kvilhaug. How did I do, Maria? Does that sound all right?
It sounded all right, yes. It's okay, yeah.
Well, thank you for being here with us today. I'm very excited to talk to you because I'm a really big fan of your work and have been for a few years now, since I moved to Denmark.
Oh, you live in Denmark then?
I do. Yeah.
I'm far.
I moved here in 2014 because I married a Danish guy.
Oh.
And I met him in Findhorn in Scotland, a spiritual community. And and then when I came here, I didn't know that much about Scandinavian mythology, spirituality, and I couldn't really find any good books, that weren't sort of more academic, historical type stuff. And I wasn't really interested in the, I don't know what you'd call it, but sort of the standard Viking stuff, I was, more of a sort of a female, divine feminine type person. So I asked, there's a lot of springs. We live in Roskilde in Sjælland.
Oh, Roskilde. Oh, yes.
Yeah. And there's a lot, there's a lot of springs here. It's beautiful. All the springs energy everywhere. And
you know that Roskilde comes from Ros, the spring, the water spring of Ros.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. And And my husband's just coming in. What are you doing, honey?
Yeah,
Oh, he's got his computer.
Mine is also wandering behind him.
They're just coming in and creeping in and wandering about. He never does that. He's quite well trained now, but never mind. Obviously. They're a bit like the cats coming in, aren't they?
Yeah, I can relate. Men, cats. Yeah.
Oh, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so I made a page for like these springs, like because I came here and I was like, wow, these springs are amazing, and there was nobody around them, and I'm going, oh, the energies, it's fantastic. So I made a Facebook page, like the Sacred Springs of Roskilde, and and then Danish people started seeing them. And somebody wrote to me on there, and so we went and had coffee together. And I said, I can't find any books about Scandinavian spirituality. And she said, you need to read Maria Kvilhaug, The Seeds of Yggdrasill. And so I did. So that was that's 7 years ago now that I bought that, and it's just I mean, I still don't know if I've read the whole thing from cover to cover because I pick it up. And I read sections of it, I've never sat and like read it in like systematic order.
I haven't either. It's not that kind of book, really. It's it's not. It doesn't read like a novel. Really.
No. How long did it take you to write that?
I could say years actually. I think I started writing a manuscript that would become this work later on, back in 2006, 2007. And then I kept working on it. I had so many hundreds of pages basically that I kept reviewing and rewriting, and eventually I just started this YouTube channel. It was actually my husband who he inspired me. He told me that I should make some videos about all the things I knew. So I tried, and I got so much response that I kept doing it for a couple of years. I think I began back in 2009 doing this and making these videos based on all the things I had been writing. Mm-hmm. And I kept going, making videos about this for several years until I had worked enough to make this book, which was finished in 2012, actually. So from 2006 to 2012, I worked on this book. So it went into 700 pages.
Yeah, I was going to say it's pretty. It's pretty weighty book, isn't it? Like,
yes.
It's not one to pack in your hand luggage.
No, it's not that kind of book. It's demanding, actually. Yeah.
But I when I got the book and I just read sort of the first. I think it's it's still in the Roman numerals pages, so it's just sort of the notes at the beginning. That bit where it says important Norse terms and sacred professions. When I read that list there, I just honestly, I can't tell you how life-changing that was for me. Just to read that list, because I could feel the energy in it of it was another way of being, because this isn't fiction. This is, a society that existed.
Yeah.
And it's still, you can still feel, I can, like in Denmark, like where I live. I mean, it's supposed to be Christian here because, we have the Domkirke and it's the seat of Christianity in Denmark. But then all around here, there's Grauhøj everywhere and there's Yggdrasill and it's just, in the museum in Roskilde, they've dug up the bones of, a Norse witch. Basically, she was buried with. It's everywhere. It's in the landscape and it's in the culture, and when I read this list of say there is magic and sorcery and witchcraft, divination, oracle, shamanism, save Kona, scald. It just, I found myself in it somehow. And it was really strange because I'd never been interested in, like I said, kind of the Viking stuff, you know, where everyone's running around killing each other with swords and calling on Odin and, you know, being very sort of masculine with it all.
Yeah.
You know,
I get the problem. I had this attitude for a while too when I was younger. Well, I was also very into women's history and the history of goddesses and witches and priestesses. And I had grown up with Norse myths and Norse stories, but I hadn't really. I also had this impression that it was a lot more masculine than it is. It's actually much more balanced. I discovered later there was a great deal of balance between the genders in both mythology and literature than I had expected when I sat down with it. So
yeah,
I was actually quite amazed when I sat down to. I had studied the Poetic Edda before in school, and I heard about it. I grew up hearing about it. It was a part of the culture I grew up in many ways. An historical part, but it was there. But I didn't really discover the Edda poems until I was about 21 years old. And then I had been really studying other sorts of mythology, and also history, archaeology and history. I was very much into Maria Gimbutas. And I had actually, I think I had a spiritual experience back then. The 20s, you're searching, and I had a lot of dreams. I dreamt a lot, and I was very curious about what these dreams might mean. And I went into a bookstore. I was in England, actually, not in Norway. I had moved to England to study art, and walked into a bookstore, and there I saw this Poetic Edda in English. It was a translation by Caroline Larrington, and I was actually like, "Wow, they have this in English!" I didn't know that it could even. I thought this was like exclusively Scandinavian, that nobody knew about it other places. I didn't realize it actually was so interesting to many English speakers, so much so that I even had translations of the Poetic Edda. And well, this was just because I didn't know that this interest was there outside of Norway or Sweden or Denmark. So, I saw it, and for some reason I didn't buy it at the moment because I had one. I remember that I had one at home. I had several books at home. I had sagas and the prose Edda and the Poetic Edda in Norwegian at home. In my parents' bookstores. Not the bookstore, but what do you call it? Bookshelves.
Bookshelves, yeah.
Yeah, in my parents' bookshelves. So I didn't buy it because I thought, I can read it when I go back home. I went back to where I was staying, and I had these very powerful dreams. So actually I had a dream about going into the underworld, and I came into a very large subterranean cavern with a river going through it, and there was a boat there. So I entered the boat, and someone was in front of me and was rowing the boat down the river. And when she turned her head, it was a woman. Her face was that of a skull of a mare, like the Celtic one, the Welsh Yule or mare thing. Yeah, and she turned around, and I remember I just saw her face, and then she rowed me down the river inside this cave, and I saw lots of ruins on like ruins of towns and villages that I was going to, and I was wondering what was there. And then I don't remember more of that dream, but I remember feeling very strongly. I had this image in the back of my mind all the morning. I had this image of the Norns pulling threads, and I even remembered something I had promised sort of when I was 9 years old, when my dad was talking to me about Norse mythology and about the Norse gods, and I asked him, where are these gods now? And he said that he thought that maybe they didn't exist anymore, because he thought that gods exist when people believe in them. So I felt really sorry for them. And I shouted out to them in the mountains. We were on a mountain cottage holiday, and I shouted out that I would remember them. And I would make sure that they were not forgotten, so that they didn't have to die. And that was a child's promise. But I remember that, and I was 21, so much time had passed. But eventually, the very next day, as soon as I could, I went back to the bookstore and I bought this book, and I started reading it, the translated version. And the more I read it, the more surprised I was about the depth of meaning in the poems. And the more aware I became that a lot of the meanings probably couldn't be understood by reading a translation alone. Because a translation, especially a translation of an old language, and Old Norse is very similar to modern Icelandic and the language they also speak in the Faroe Islands, but it's not the same. It was spoken in a different manner in many. They used a lot more metaphors and picture language. So I decided to read more translations. So when I come home to Norway, I found 2 different Norwegian translations. One that I had in the bookshelf of one of my parents, and one that I bought. And I started to compare them. And then I realized that, oh, wow, they are actually quite different from each other. None of them are probably wrong, but they are different. They represent different ways of understanding it and thus translating it as well. And I decided that if I'm going to ever understand what they really try to say, I have to start reading these poems in the Old Norse language. And that was a bit of a process of learning. But, yeah. And also, I think I figured out quite early that the meanings of names and place names could be significant. At least in many of the stories, they do powerfully indicate what the one who made the poem was trying to convey. So I started out also translating the names. So I spent years and years doing that. So many years before I started to write the manuscript or started to make the videos, I kept working with these poems, and I even made cartoons about them. That was a way of also learning them more. So yeah.
Wow, so it's lovely.
Academic work that I was pulled into it by a sense of, I don't know, by a sense of faith and a sense of magic in a way, and spirituality, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. And and I think in another time and another era, if universities were a little bit more like sort of, what's that one in Harry Potter? Is it Hogwarts?
Yeah.
Perhaps you would have stayed on in university and been able to do the work in the way that you wanted to. But my husband, he's a researcher at Roskilde University, and I studied nursing many years ago, but I didn't really know about how universities worked until I met Thomas.
Yeah.
who works in one, and it's like the boxes are so rigid and so fixed in the way that you have to work. And it was, I really understood why you didn't stay, and you couldn't do the work that you do in that environment.
No, I would probably have had to be a lot more careful with what I claimed, and I wasn't ready to be that careful. I've always had very much respect for scientific methods and academic works, and I mostly only read academics works when it comes to this, because not because I don't think that any author of neo-pagan literature is not good, but I realized quite early on that if I did read books written by non-academics whose reason for writing it was religious in some way, they would often claim things that were more of a personal insight thing, but it was very hard to decide whether this was their personal insight or something that could actually be proved or argued convincingly about. So I just stopped reading these neo-pagan works for this reason, so that I wouldn't get confused between what the actual sources said and what could actually be argued in an academic way. At the same time, I learned the hard way that the academic world is a bit too narrow especially for young students who have a lot of ideas. I had this revelation when I did my master degree, the Maiden with the Mead. I wrote a thesis about the initiation themes in the Poetic Edda, and I got this. I had a lot of support from my supervisors, and I got to hear during my examination that I had actually proved that this basic theme of initiation and the way I had analyzed it was convincingly presented, that they couldn't really argue against it. But the willingness to allow me in it felt a bit cold in a way. I didn't feel that I got in there, and I thought, all right, maybe I just don't have this. Even with an academic background, I don't have this. I don't have what it takes as a person, perhaps, to be to fit in, basically.
Yeah. Well, I have
to go solo.
Yeah. Personally speaking, I feel like their loss was our gain, because university researchers tend to write papers that other university researchers read rather than the general public. So, I feel like, those people who, are the general public that are interested in this sort of thing have really benefited from all the things that you've shared. And if you'd have stayed, was it Oslo University?
University,
if it was Oslo, I'm not sure I would have ever known that you existed, and that would have been very sad for me.
Yeah, that's true, and that was also one reason I went down the path I did, was that I discovered so many amazing studies written by students, by professors, by all sorts of people, both in Norwegian and in other Scandinavian languages and English. I found so many great academic works and acclaimed works, but they didn't get out. They were there, you could only find them in the library. Some of them you could only find if you had a master student card for the library, that you had to go down to the cellar, to the basement of the university library. That was not actually available to most people. And also the language, the way it is presented, you actually have to be trained to manage to read those things without it being too heavy. And I think I have a very powerful urge to what do you call it, formidle, to transmit, to make these stories, and a lot also this research, also not only my research but the research of other people, also to make it more easily accessible to people who were just interested. Because what I discovered when I was, for example, when I was in England and also in other countries, was that it was I was quite amazed by how many people asked me questions about Norse mythology and the Viking Age. People I met, people who you would never believe would ask me, but yeah, this was something that lots of people were interested in. So
yeah, and it's incredible how much, you know, material there is, you know, on Norse mythology, from archaeology and from the Eddas, and there's nothing else like it. It's just there's so much richness there, but without people like you to sort of translate it a bit and make it accessible, it would be I wouldn't be able to understand, you know, 90% of it, I think. And you know, and I'm not a stupid person, but you have to know a lot of, you know, like you talking about those metaphors and those kennings, and you have to really know a lot of stuff before you can even start to approach, you know,
exactly
what it means. And I don't have the time. I don't have the time.
Yeah, that's my job, to break it down, come up with my own stuff. But I think I have presented some research that has been. I remember a few years ago, someone asked me, someone from Sweden, I think, asked me if I knew how to get hold of a copy of a book written by another professor, a woman called Else Mundal, that I refer to in my work. I refer to her a lot because she wrote a very good study of the fylgja, the motive of the fylgjur. And they had never heard about her, even though they were also academics in Sweden. So she was a Norwegian academic. Well, she still lives. But she wrote a very important piece that has inspired me a lot. And I was very happy to be able to actually connect with her and ask her if she still had some books to sell. She was really surprised. She said she had some books. So suddenly 3-4 different people from Sweden and Denmark got her work. And I'm really happy to have that, been able to sort of revive some knowledge that it's just dusting away in university library cellars.
Yeah, that's it. And I think it will continue to revive the interest in kind of Old Norse and Scandinavia, because I mean, I'm not maybe that your average person that likes this sort of thing, you know, at heart I would probably, you know, I probably am really described as a new ager, but I love all this stuff. And when I talk to other people about it who are also new agers, they also love it. It's like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. It's almost like something that's been missing, because there's a lot of groundedness. There's a lot of groundedness to this spirituality and to the energy of it. It's very nitty gritty. It's not trying to be all love and light, you know?
No, it isn't actually. It's I agree. It's nice that it's definitely more. Well, it's not all love and light, but it's still very deep, and there is some light in it too.
There is, absolutely. That's it. That's it. You've got both ends of the scale. It can hold, you know, which like, because Thomas, my husband, he's also like really into Carl Jung, and he's spent 6 years studying to be a psychoanalyst. I said, honestly, Thomas, can't you find something shorter to do than 6 year training? But I do understand why he loves it. And it's this whole thing about being able to hold the opposite of tensions. And that is in the Nordic cosmology for me. You've got the really high energies and you've got the very deep energies, and both of them can be there. It's not one or the other. It's all of it.
I think what I noticed about it a lot was that it doesn't seem like they had the same duality that we are accustomed to today. It looks like the good versus evil. It's not that they did think something was bad and something was good, but they don't have this whole worldview based on either evil or good, and you know, it's not so dogmatic as that. Like the character Loki, for example, is very, very complex. You can't say he's a negative figure, and you can't say it's a positive figure either. It's he's just a very, very complex character, and I think that he's an amazing image of the human spirit, actually, with all its ups and downs, all its contradictions in a way.
I read something about him the other day, or I heard something about him the other day, and I don't know if it was you I was listening to or something else that I was reading, but it slipped away from me, and I'm really cross because I can remember thinking, oh wow, because I've never felt like I've really understood what he is about. And also he was a giant, and then he became, one of the gods, and what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, I can't tell you what it means, actually. I think we have to all feel our way there. But all I know is that the stories tell that he was a Jotun, which we translate to giant. Actually, the word Jotun didn't actually mean giant. It meant someone who eats a lot, a devourer.
Sounds like me.
Yeah. And sometimes, and it's also, I hear people asking, maybe they were Neanderthals, maybe they were Sami, and well, we can't say they were that, but they are characters from literature that we know, but some of them do seem to be based on, for example, Sami culture. So it is possible that there was a mix sometimes in saga stories where Sami people suddenly become but they didn't actually represent Sami people either. They just represent something in the universe, in the world at large, some powers of different kinds, and they mostly have to do with natural forces, it seems. But where were we? What was that question again?
I was just, wondering about Loki, and saying I've never really got a handle on him, and I wonder what that's all about.
Yeah, the Jotun aspect. Well, he sort of enables. He is the one in all the stories where he appears. He is the one who travels into the other worlds, for example, into the giant worlds. And if other people, except Odin, if other characters travel, they often travel, like Thor, often travel with Loki into the other world. So he's sort of, it's almost like he enables them to access other worlds than their own. And even the horse that he gives birth to when he turned into a mare, that horse is the one that Odin has to ride when he travels into other worlds. That was a gift from Loki. It's actually Loki's child. So he has a role that is very similar to that of shamans, I think. Like he is doing services for the gods, finding things, finding lost things that have gotten lost in the other worlds. And in one old skaldic poem that is dated back to the year 900, Haustlang, Loki is referred to as Sagnarærir, and that means the one who stirs the stories. And I think that in the stories, in the myth, that's exactly his role. He is the one who creates conflict, and then he's the one who deals with the conflict, and then he's the one who solves the conflict. Always, he makes the conflict, but he also solves it. So he sort of represents that power in the world, I think, the power that actually creates the drama.
Yeah.
And
So I'm reading Neil Price's book at the moment, The Children of Ash and Elm, and I was reading about this idea that there was a huge sort of volcanic event that created a ash cloud over Scandinavia, and it seems to have sort of be something that has gained some approval from different types of scholars. And I was just thinking, because he said about 50%, they reckon about 50% of the population in Scandinavia died from this volcanic event in the 6th century.
Yeah.
And you know, how this could have been, you know, like connected to like Ragnarok and those kind of stories. And because it's Loki, isn't it? He gets quite a rough deal, really. He gets sort of tied up until the end of the, what is that right? Is it Loki? He gets tied up and has this poison dripping on him for like until the end of the world.
Yeah, well, that's because the gods discovered that he was the one who was behind the murder of Baldur.
That's right.
That's why he was tied up. Yeah.
It's like for a really long time though, till the world ends. It's like, oh dear.
Yeah. But that I haven't read The Children of Ash and Elm. I haven't.
It's really interesting.
But it is true that there was a volcanic event somewhere. I think perhaps on Iceland. This was before Iceland was settled, or elsewhere. But it went through all of Europe, especially Northern Europe, and Scandinavia was very hard hit. And it's true that it's estimated that maybe 1/2 of the population died during this time, not from the volcanoes, because the volcano didn't happen in Scandinavia, didn't happen in Europe. It probably happened outside of Europe or in Iceland. But it left clouds for 3 years. There would have been ash clouds all over, causing, of course, famine, because it would block the light of the sun, and it caused not only famine, and it caused long winters, the Fimbulveter, which means the great winter. And it caused the sky to go dark, the sun wasn't seen, and I think this happened around 536, and we have lots and lots of sources from all over Europe describing this time as a very hard time. And not only, they also got a pandemic. There was a plague going there, and probably similar to the Black Death, the bubonic plague. We don't know, but there was also it came with plague, and it came, of course, with wars, with lawlessness, with the complete destruction of the crumbling of civilization. It really destroyed European culture, the European culture that existed back then. So when we read in the Völuspá poem, the Edda poem Völuspá, about Ragnarök, this description of what's going to happen, what's going to destroy the world, is very similar to what actually did happen back in 530s. I think it was 536, actually. So this is absolutely true. But I haven't read what Neil Price wrote about it.
I mean, I'd never heard of this before. I've just never heard of it. And it's just fascinating because it makes so much sense, because I've never really, like, all the things about Ragnarok, I'm like, where's this coming from? I don't understand. It's just like, it seems so bleak and all the rest of it. But when he's describing like all those things you were just saying, then I'm like, okay, now I'm seeing it, because that is going to be, you know, deep in like the collective unconscious of a culture, even centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries of
it literally destroyed. I mean, imagine your village, your town, everyone you know, suddenly only a third is left, perhaps. After a few years of suddenly the sun, it is thought. I heard a lecture by a archaeologist, a Norwegian archaeologist, Lena Fare, a few years ago, where she talked about this and how society changed a lot. For example, the religion changed. During the Bronze Ages, like 1,000 years before this, people had been building these great burial mounds. But then during the Iron Ages, they stopped doing that. But after this event in 536, almost 1,000 years after they stopped making these huge mounds, they started to really build mounds again. It's like they returned to this custom of making huge burial mounds. We don't know why, but this happened just after this great cataclysmic event. So something changed in society. Also, you find images of the sun goddess, that we have lots of images of the sun from the Bronze Ages. She also disappeared, sort of, but after this cataclysmic event, you find the images of the sun goddess on so many standing stones, rune stones, from this centuries after this event happened. So yeah, I think this was something that really carved itself very deep in the minds of people who lived back then, and the stories that they transmitted on. They could really literally imagine how the world would, fall apart, because some of them had experienced it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and of course, it's more vivid to me reading this because, of COVID, because we've had our own event that has come in, and technology has dealt with things to such a great degree that it hasn't been the crisis that it would have been, prior to us being such a technological society. But it's interesting. It's interesting because, I think you can see the same things, people in society, and people have lots of different ideas about what's caused it, just like they did then. It's like, what's gone on? Was this what's happened to the sun goddess? I can imagine they must have thought that, she'd was really cross with them, or they've been bad, or
she was eaten by a wolf.
Eaten by a wolf. Yeah, exactly.
Then she rebirthed herself, and this is so beautifully put in the Völuspá, and also in some other poems where they describe that the sun actually gives birth to a daughter who follows in her mother's path. So there is a new sun after this catastrophe. Also, it's interesting that after this catastrophe, many of the countries in continental Europe actually converted to Christianity. It was during the same era. So maybe people lost faith in the old gods. Maybe they got new faith in the new religion that sort of could explain why God did this to you. So pagans. But up in the northernmost parts, then people just the pagan religion also changed, as we have seen, as the archaeology has shown. Something changed also in their religious life, but they stayed pagan.
Yes, but that's I think it was something he wrote. I read something that Carl Jung wrote about how, these old gods were still very much in the collective unconscious of the countries where they had been, and I was really fascinated to read that, because he was kind of like, ignore them at your peril.
I'm not an expert on Jung, actually. I'm sure I did read something about from him a long time ago, but I don't think it's wrong, actually. In my experience, these gods also, I think I've said it publicly, that I'm not religious. I don't adhere to a particular religion. I don't. But that doesn't mean I don't believe that these gods exist in some way. Like my father told me that they exist because you believe in them. In a way, they also have their own existence. I have in my mind, I have these images of them, and I've also had this sense of communicating with them, getting advice from them. So they have a reality, whether it be in our mind, in our collective consciousness, or in the cosmos, as more objectively. They have this presence that I feel anyway.
Yeah. I've been listening to the lectures you made up about Eden on
Yeah.
your Patreon site. I think there was a lot. I might have got a little bit.
That's hardcore lecture.
It was well, I've always been really interested in her for some reason, and I haven't been able to find that much about her and her like field of wells. And when you said that there's a thing about like her field of wells will be there when Ragnarok is finished, and sort of like the new earth, that's probably not the way you said it, but like the new earth is like, you know, being recreated. And because I'm surrounded by water here in Roskilde, I am like literally surrounded by all these.
It's a very sacred landscape there. I've been there once, and I just walked around a lot and was amazed.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Oh, I love it.
I totally agree with you. There is I think this may have been an area where there was a lot of religious activity going on, and it can still be felt in a way.
I think so. I've not and I've asked people, I've not come across anything sort of pre-Christian, but I'm sure these springs were around sort of pre-Christianity. Yeah. And we have, of course, Lyre just down the road. But I think some of these springs are named here.
Yeah, definitely. And if some of those springs are named after Mary or any saint, then it's definitely used to be something about the pagan gods before, because they also always replaced the names of pagan gods on places with saint names.
That's right. That's right.
But there is this notion that the world, even if everything ends, there is always something new. There is always a new beginning. That's something that goes like a red thread through all these myths, that the world renews itself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it has to be destroyed before it renews itself. That's something that goes on and on and on in these myths.
Yeah. So how many years have you been studying all this Norse cosmology now, Maria? Do you think?
It depends on when I should start counting, because I am pretty sure I already began when I was a child in a way, because I read a lot. So I remember reading books about these things too. I also had this grandfather who was into these myths and stories and sagas, who introduced me to a lot. Actually, he could recite some Edda poetry to me in Norwegian though, but and he could recite different saga stories to me and talked a lot about it. So I guess without knowing it, I was already studying it for a long time. I remember also we had Old Norse in high school when I was like 16, 17. And that it interested me, that I was amazed that this language was I could sort of read it already then, because it was so similar to Norwegian, but still also very different, also grammatically very different, and many words had changed meanings, or they had just had different words, or words that I could recognize, but that were old-fashioned to me. So it was sort of easy to get into, but I don't think I actually really started to consciously study Norse mythology as such until I was 21, when I was found this book that I told you about. That was when I got absolutely hooked and obsessed about it, and it just didn't stop. I think I'm interested in all sorts of history. I love, especially ancient history. I love ancient history, archaeology. At some point I wanted to become an archaeologist, but it didn't work that way. But I could have studied other sorts of mythologies too. I was interested in other mythology from all over the world, and I read a lot of ethnographies. So it wasn't this. It wasn't that I was interested in. There was nothing nationalistic in my approach at all. It was just that I discovered that this was closer to my culture and what I grew up with, and it was easier for me to get into it, easier to learn this old language, and it just felt very relevant in a way to me. And the moment I started to sort of dig in and started to discover that, oh wow, there are meanings here, and happily discovering that, yeah, actually Norse poetry is actually based on metaphors. That's how it works. That's how it's made. It's made with metaphors. The entire Prose Edda, written by Snorri Sturluson, was a way of explaining these metaphors used in Edda and Skaldic poetry, so that he made it actually possible for us he gave us a key to unlock the actual meanings of these poems. So I was just hooked, and it just became the field where I feel I specialized and where I feel I have some expertise.
And you're still hooked today?
Yeah, I am. I have other interests too, but it is where I have. I think maybe this is the era where where I feel that I really do have something to come with, something to share. That's something that is original. Yeah.
I was talking to my Danish husband Thomas about interviewing you, and I was saying about because when I've heard you speak Norwegian, I can't understand Norwegian, but I understand Danish fairly okay.
Yeah.
And because Thomas, like, he can be on like a Zoom call with someone in a university in Norway and someone in a university in Swedish, and they all speak their own language and they understand each other. But I mean, obviously I don't have that level of competence with the language, but I can read, I can see that Norwegian is very similar to Danish in a lot of the words, I guess, because of that period where Denmark was ruling over Norway. But then Thomas said, no, I'd never heard this before. He said there's a language called New Norsk.
Yeah, actually, yes. That was Nynorsk was actually invented by a linguist during the 1800s, Ivar Aasen. And he did that as a part of the liberation process, because Norway wanted to become free from Denmark, obviously. And he was among the people who pointed out that we are writing in Danish. When you read Norwegian, it's almost identical to Danish. But when we speak, we sound very different. And we use different words. And especially if you go outside of Oslo, especially on the West Coast, the dialects there were much closer to the Old Norse than the language that we speak in the towns. So he created a written language system that would be more suitable for people who live in the countryside or outside on the West Coast of Norway. This language is better for them because it's more close to how they actually speak. He wanted the people who promoted Nynorsk, it means new Norwegian, but it's actually based on older Norwegian. It's not a spoken language, it's a written language, but it's based on dialects. The reason why we can understand each other so easily is because all our languages, Danish and Swedish and Norwegian, they have the same roots, and they just evolved out of different dialects, different accents. So we sound very different, but when you look at the way if you read these languages, you'll see how similar they actually are. So I think people who did not, when I grew up, we watched a lot of Danish movies, and we watched a lot of Swedish movies. We even had Swedish TV, and it wasn't dubbed or anything. We just got these neighboring languages in. So I can't speak Danish and I can't speak Swedish, but I can understand it. I can hear them and understand it. I think Danish is sometimes the hardest for me to understand because of the pronunciations.
Because they swallow all of their
they swallow the words.
They do. I couldn't.
So
I
I
couldn't.
struggle sometimes.
Yeah.
I do speak English with Danish people, but
Yeah.
but I can understand them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's. I mean, when I had to go to language school and learn Danish to pass my language exams to live here, and I couldn't believe, I felt like I was learning two languages: the written language and then the way it's spoken, because I couldn't actually see really how they related to each other. They're so different from each other. But I mean, I'm pretty much used to it now. So that's I've been here 7 years now, and I go to school meetings for my son, and they speak Danish and I speak English, because when I do speak Danish, it's just so difficult for people to understand my accent.
I heard they did a study on Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish children, and discovered that Danish children actually use 1 more year than Norwegian and Swedish children to actually learn to speak their own language properly, because of these difficult pronunciations.
Yeah, well, that makes me feel a bit better.
Yeah. But when I went to Sweden once, I was asked to hold a lecture in Sweden, and I asked if I was going to hold it in English, and they said, no, you can hold it in Norwegian. And I was like, all right. And I actually did check my manuscript for this lecture. I did a Google Translate just to make sure that some words that there was maybe 3 or 4 words that I changed just to make them sound more Swedish, and they understood everything. They had no problem understanding Norwegian. So
yeah. Well, that's handy, isn't it?
Yeah, but we do travel a lot between the countries,
Yeah. So what have you got planned for the future then? Where do you see yourself going with all this?
I have never been very good at planning my future, actually. I haven't. I'm a very here and now, actually, and I also have a tendency to just leave the past behind. So it's very hard to think what I'm going to do in the future. I think that's that. I just know what I'm doing now, the projects I'm doing now. I had this project based on, well, after I opened the Patreon, I earned a bit more on this work, and it made it possible for me to, well, when I make these lectures, I make at least one lecture every month, sometimes more, and they will form the basis of a few books that I am working on. So every lecture is part of a manuscript that will turn into a book eventually. So there will be a book about Eden, where I go through the sources, the Skaldskaparmål source, the Haustlang, the Skaldic poem source, and the Rafnagalder Odins, the Odin's Raven Song, which also I think is about Eden. And it's also the poem where I got the title from, the Seed of Yggdrasill. It actually comes from stanza 6 in Rafnagalder Odins, where Eden is said to be fra Yggdrasils, the seed of Yggdrasill, sinking down the ash. That's Eden. And I'm writing, also working on this huge lecture series, which will become a book, which is probably going to be as big as the Seed of Yggdrasill. And that's going to be about Seider and Fjölkingi. Fjölkingi means great knowledge, and is usually translated as witchcraft or sorcery in modern translations of the sagas. And since I always read these passages in the Old Norse and try to do my own translations, I've discovered that the word Fjölkingi is the word most used for all kinds of magic. Even skaldskap is a form of Fjölkingi. Seider is a form of Fjölkingi, and it just means great knowledge.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. I haven't got onto those lectures yet. I've been too busy.
You have a whole series in front of you. And I'm thinking of wrapping it up now. In a few lectures time, I will have enough for a whole manuscript, one part of the work. Then I'm gonna move on to go through the initiation stories of the Edda that I've already worked with a lot, but I'm gonna go much more in depth into each story, beginning with the initiation of Odin.
Fantastic. Oh, I can't wait. And I mean, I can, because I've got a lot to listen to already. So by the time you've done it, I might have caught up and be ready to listen to it. But I mean, I've been studying like a course on Seidr with a woman called Imelda Almqvist, and she is from the Netherlands, lives in London, and has been teaching us in Sweden.
Yes, I think I've had some contact with her at some point.
Yes. Oh, she's fantastic. She's really fantastic. And she always recommends your work. And, you know, your work is on our reading list.
Oh, great. Yes. Thank you. I do have one wish for the future. I do. And that is to somehow get the time and room to continue writing my novel series. Because that has been put on hold for such a long time. Yeah.
Is it 3? There's 3 books.
I have 4.
Oh, there's 4
books now.
Okay.
There's 4 books now. Yeah, and they are republished now by the 3 little sisters. They do work as they are. In the 4 books actually make a good story on their own, but it's supposed to continue. I haven't been able to do that because of time, basically.
Yeah. I understand. I read them a few years ago, and I remember the last one. When I read the last one, I was like, I want to read more.
It ends with a cliffhanger. There is a 4th. There is if you ended up with you read the Helrun's Claim, I think, the last one. Yeah. There is a 4th book.
Okay.
So there is a continuation. Where you get to know what happened. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, right. I'll go and look for that. Did you enjoy writing them?
Oh, yeah. I think they came out of a very dark place, actually. I was actually physically ill, so I couldn't work. Fortunately for me, I live in Norway, so I got actually support from the state to get through it, and I couldn't really do anything. I couldn't hardly go out of the house. So, and I had written the Seed of Yggdrasill already, and I wasn't in a shape to actually do more academic work at the time. So I was just writing, often from the bed, actually, just writing and writing and writing. So I can't say I was actually enjoying myself at this time. It was hard, but I think writing these books actually saved me in many ways, and it came from the heart, and it felt so much like the story was just telling itself, like the characters just came and demanded to tell the story. And I had this plan when I set out, and that was to write a story about the life of the Oseberg priestess, the youngest one, and her relationship to the older one. But then as soon as I started writing, I got into this storyline and this place where so many different characters seem to want to have their stories told. And it was really a magical experience in a way. It just came. It's just, I could sit down, put my my fingers to the tastature, and it just came.
Yeah. And then they are very alive, those books. It does feel like, when I'm reading it, I'm not thinking, this is a story. It's like, it's really happening.
That's what I felt too. And I still feel it. I sometimes read them myself again. And I'm like, wow, this is... Sometimes some of the characters have opinions that I don't agree with. Many other things happen that actually upset me. But it's like I had to tell it that way, because that was how it was in a way.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, these people, they became very much alive. I think many fiction writers get this. I think that you feel that characters are real and have their own lives and their own opinions and their own experiences, and I'm just channeling them in a way. That's what it feels like. I think that's very common for fiction writers, actually.
Yeah. And when I heard you talking about your grandfather on one of the videos on Patreon, and and I've seen the videos that you do, it really feels like you come from a line of storytellers.
I do. Oh, I do.
Yeah.
That's true. Both my parents told lots and lots of stories from their childhoods, from their youth, from when we were small, from their parents, from people they had known, and also about other things. Like my father was very much into history, and he could also tell me and philosophy. He could tell me stories also about places and times and what people had thought 2,000 years ago and why that changed. So they were great storytellers, both of them. And my grandparents, I think apart from my morfar, my mother's father, he got Alzheimer's when I was relatively young. So I didn't really hear his stories, but I heard stories about him. But my grandmother and my murmur, my mother's mother, had a lot of stories from her life and the people she knew when she grew up and from during the war. And I had, of course, my farmor and farfar, my father's parents, who are also amazing storytellers, especially I think the greatest storyteller of them all was my farfar, my Einar. He had lived such a life. He had been a sailor, so he had been all over the world. And he had such an eye for detail, for good dialogues, what people had said that impressed him. And also from the war, all of them had stories about the Second World War, when Norway was occupied by Germany, and they were all involved in the secret resistance in some way or other. And my grandfather, Einar, he was very active, actually. He did sabotage. His father-in-law, my great-grandfather, also did sabotage. He managed to put explosives on the train, Tønsberg trains railway station. He wanted to destroy some German train delivery. And he did this on his 50th birthday in 1942. And he actually invited a whole party of people, including the police, the chief of the police, who was known to be sympathizing with the Nazis. And he even invited him. And they went up to this place called Slottsfjellet in Tønsberg. That's a little hill from where you could have a very good view of the train station at midnight. And they were celebrating his 50th birthday, so obviously they put up the booze and cheered, and then bang, there was this massive explosion down at the train station. And my great-grandfather, who had the birthday, he was cheering very loudly, and the police officer turned to him and like, okay, Ole Anton, you're living dangerously. But he didn't rat on him. So yeah, they had so many stories to tell, actually, about these times. I feel like I have stories going back to the 1800s from my family.
Wow.
So I understand a bit about how oral transmission works, in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that in a time when you didn't have TV, you didn't have internet, you didn't have phones, they didn't even have newspapers or books. They were all relying on oral transmission, on storytelling. That's how they learned things about the past, everything. And they also had these traditions of learning things by heart, like poetry by heart. So I think I understand how it's possible that people could sit down and write sagas and poetry down 200 years, 300 years, 400 years after they actually happened, because storytelling traditions were really powerful. And if I, in my time, could actually learn so much by just listening to old people, because I was a little bit of a weird child who liked to listen to old people more than I liked to play with other children. So I got these stories a lot, and I can imagine that many of the stories told in the sagas actually do have a good deal of basis in real events and real people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's been really, really lovely talking to you. I'm so grateful to you for your time and your energy, because I know, you're very busy, and that, the amount of work you put into your Patreon and the lectures, it's just phenomenal. I can see just the hours and hours and hours of dedicated study that go into it.
It does take some passion, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, oh, you're welcome. And yeah, big thank you from me and, all of your fans, of whom I know many. And we all think you're
say
fantastic.
Hello to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And perhaps we can talk again another day.
Oh yes, definitely. Nice talk.
It's been really lovely.
I go to Roskilde again.
Oh yes, do. I could show you some lovely places.
Yes.
Maybe,
I would love
a bit
that.
hidden.
Yeah. Oh yes. Great. Thank you.
All right. So have a lovely
rest. Norway, I'll take you to some burial mounds.
Yes.
Have them too.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. I like a good burial mound.
Yeah, me too. Hi. Bye.
Bye, Maria. Bye.
Bye.
Au heia valea naue e kaliko puakukui. Uhi ao kauna ia a kapu ke momori nei. Piko I kahimanao I kahapili ko haloa ia. Hea ke kaula lopi ana e kopu kapalili ai. Haina mai kapuana e kahaliko puakukui. Au heia valeana oe e kahaliko puakukui. Kuhi au kaunai a kapu kumoni nei. Pikoi kahimanao I kahapili koholuaia. Hea ke kaula lopi ana e kopu kapalili ai. Haina mai kapuana e kahaliko puakukui. Au heia valeana oe e kahaliko puakukui. Kuhi au konaia a kapu ke momori nei. Piko I kahimanao I kahapili ko aloha ia. Hea ke kaula lopi ana he kopu kapalili ai. Haina mai kapuana e e kahaliko pua kukui. He noa no na ka ui